Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. This is Dan Turchin, host of AI and the Future of Work, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I met the Tooso guys when they were accepted into Alchemist Accelerator's Class 16 batch way back in 2017. Honestly, I didn't know what they were planning to do, and to be fair, neither did they. We went on their entrepreneurial journey together until they were acquired by Coveo in 2019. I enjoyed every minute. I learned from their infectious energy and their positive attitudes. On the dark days when we questioned product market fit, they did what great entrepreneurs do. They asked customers and let the market guide their strategy. These guys lived through the challenges of seeking funding when investors would only criticize the size of their market and the quality of their pipeline. They never questioned the value of using AI to improve search quality. And they had just legendary strength of conviction that they could validate their technology with high-end fashion brands doing e-commerce search. Silicon Valley mints successes and failures every day. It turns out Italy has a much different way of nurturing entrepreneurs. Someday you'll watch the Tooso story on the silver screen and you'll see everything you'd expect. 3 guys in a garage being on the brink of runaway success and imminent failure on the same day. Customers that love you and hate your product, and other customers that hate you and love your product. Behemoth incumbents threatening to crush you, and a tiny startup ultimately rising up to crush them, all while learning about each other in an environment so intense that it pushes everyone to their limits. I want you to listen to what these guys have to teach us. Ciro and Jacopo's story represents just one small sliver of how the future of work is being created. But their story is human, and it's raw, and it's beautiful. Without further ado, I'm proud to turn the mic over to my friends, Ciro Greco and Jacopo Tagliabue, who I promised I would butcher his name. I also learned in the process of preparing for the show that it means ox cutter. Guys, without further ado, welcome to our Tooso reunion. And of course, please send my regards to Mattia. Let's kick things off by just describe how you met, a little bit about your background, and how you got into the space.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for having us, Dan. Like, this is really a pleasure. And as you said, like kind of a reunion. For those who don't know, Dan backed us when we were raising and really helped do so to go through the whole process that, as he described, was pretty intense. And we checked all the boxes of the kind of American dream, the MVP in the garage,
on the verge of the night, like dream and nightmare.
Dream, nightmare. yeah, exactly. We go way back. So we met back in the days in college, and whether you believe it or not, we all studied philosophy, and that includes Mattia, our third co-founder. And then we kind of did very different things. Mattia became more of a consultant in like the digital space and things like that, like about mostly like digital transformation. I myself then did like a PhD in neuroscience. I got really into language and the linguistics, which was defined by my supervisor at the time as a suicide career move. But it's mostly Noam Chomsky's fault. When I went to MIT, and then I've basically been like an academic for a while, and then we started working together with Jacopo. You also have a PhD in fancy stuff.
Yes, so I also have a PhD in somewhat fancy stuff and went through MIT as well, but different department. And I left academia before Ciro, as I found out before him that it was a bad career move for some reason. So, and I always loved like logic and, representation, knowledge representation, and so on and so forth. And I also don't like, then when we met you the first time, I mean, we love data science and deep learning and a lot of stuff, but also I think there's a sort of this, I mean, there's a subgroup of people that also likes, more of the structure, old age stuff, old age approach to concept and knowledge. And also I think there was like a good like bonding, conceptual bonding moment, with us three. Yeah. And of course, Ciro, Ciro coming from the formal linguistics like traditions, it was kind of like a very good match for what I was already kind of thinking on my side of the of the science.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because it was about like, then we started working on, how does like a more formal approach to language, how can that thing can be used like in information retrieval or artificial intelligence, how it is matched with machine learning and so on. And so we kind of started just like throwing ideas at each other. And then what we quickly got into is, can we have like semantics into like search queries? Can we bring like the search experience to a more human oriented approach? Like the main problem for us was, sure, like Google is awesome and all that, but all these guys like have bazillions of data and all the technology in the world, but basically outside of that, it's kind of a wild, it's kind of a no man's land where you still have like the search engines are based on technology that's very old. And what was annoying is the fact that those search engines somehow bend your mind into thinking like them, because they won't work, right? So you kind of think in keywords and okay, so this must be like the right query to elicit the results that I'm looking for, as opposed to the whole more flexible experience that the big players offer you, where you just like, oh, I just want a restaurant in Manhattan, let's fire up my Android phone and just look for it. And so we found a viable business opportunity in creating a set of APIs that could be plugged in the back of search engines that are somewhat siloed inside their own website. And e-commerce was the first application that was the first application that we landed on, because there's real dollars attached to it. So it's like, it was easier for us to articulate a value prop, a monetary value prop, as opposed to like experience is going to get better and people are going to be happier. On the other hand, like in e-commerce, the pitch is very easy. It was like, like if my technology works, you're going to make more money. And so that's how we started. And then we got applied to a bunch of accelerators, because we were back in Europe. I mean, yeah, you were in New York.
I was in New York, yes.
You were in New York, yeah. Right? But I was in Belgium and in Flanders, where there's not much of a tech scene, I tell you. So and so we applied to a bunch of accelerators, and then Ravi Belani, God bless him, said like, hey, great team, great idea, like everything about you. I can invest in this company, but you got to come to San Francisco. And by the time you finish the sentence, I had my backpack done. And so we basically moved to San Francisco and started our company there. And then we went through the whole, the whole thing, raise money, understand how that thing works, knowing nobody in California, which also didn't really help.
So we've had some amazing international entrepreneurs on the podcast recently, including one of my favorites, Joe Raymond, who founded a company called Victory Farms. It's the largest aquaculture farm in Africa. Doing amazing work to introduce protein into the diets of East Africans. Now, your journey's a little different. So from Flanders, from Italy, you ended up out here through our mutual friend, Ravi Belani. Talk to us about the differences between being an entrepreneur, whether it's in Italy, Belgium, Europe, et cetera, and coming out to Silicon Valley.
Well, we didn't have much of an experience as entrepreneur before US. Yeah. I had some work experience in Italy as an employee. So in a small company that actually taught me a lot. As you know, the good thing about small companies is that you get to wear many hats, which I think it's a cool. I mean, in a startup that's magnified, 50x. But if you are a founder, but even if you're a small company, I think that it was good. But being an entrepreneur, it's a completely different, and especially the mindset of the venture-based or venture-backed or somehow Silicon Valley playbook of scale and growth and so on and so forth was different from my experience as an employee previously in Italy. So I think for me there are two completely different experiences. In Italy was like I was part of a lifetime business, which was very successful, but within the pros and cons of that. While in New York first and then in Silicon Valley, I was thrown in this just incredible mind-bending machine of growth and and raise and huge scales and global markets and so on and so forth. So for me, it was two words that are very hard to compare, both as pros and both as cons, depending on what.
Yeah, like the most puzzling concept that we learned right away was FOMO, where we were just like from Italy, just like, so wait, are actually people that are fearing to miss out an opportunity
to spend
and
money.
so you can, yeah, exactly, you can fear, like you can basically get somebody to invest out of fear. It's like that's not a thing in Italy at all. Because it's a much less dynamic environment, I think.
Yeah,
nobody's talk about appetite for risk being one of the hallmarks of Silicon Valley. I'd love to get your perspective. What would you say is there a different perception of risk and failure in Europe?
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely.
Yeah,
they can be like as opposite as you can think of on a kind of a virtual spectrum. Like I think like in general we come from a country where technical skills are usually very good, and there's tons of engineers and very resilient entrepreneurs, but the ecosystem is much more risk averse, and so there's a general idea. I think like nobody thinks of companies as experiments, which is almost what I found in California, where to a certain extent it's better if the company fails fast, because at least we know that it doesn't work and we can move on. And this is simply unconceivable, in Italy, or I think in Europe in general. In Europe in general.
But I think that thing makes super sense in under one condition, which is if you don't fail fast, when you're gonna win at the reasonable scale.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, this whole idea of experimenting a lot, which is, by the way, a lot of analogies with actually, experimental design and a lot of stuff in scientific method is like, if you want to experiment a lot, it means that at least when you're right, you're massively right. Otherwise, that rarely pays off for the time that you're wrong. And I think the lack of the same type of exit market that in the United States, or exit or public or whatever, I think it's probably one of the biggest, at least to me, one of the biggest factors that's kind of dragging Italy down as an ecosystem.
It's unclear what's the exit strategy for a company in Italy. I think it's getting better. It's definitely getting better, but it's just not on the same scale. And also, you can see that from, like the due diligence that people ask you. As like there was this thing, it was somewhat surprising. And by the way, like it couldn't be more true. But it's this idea that your company is not going to fail because of technology. Nobody gives a damn. And so they kind of, you talk to people that assume you have technology. They don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about like the business model. They want to talk about growth. They want to talk about where you're going in 5 years and things like that. And the due diligence with a European investor can be a very long list of questions about your technology. And it's all about that. It's just like, does this work? It's like, well, yes, but also who cares?
It depends on what you mean.
Depends on, exactly.
It depends on what you mean.
And it looks like more corp dev actually than VC.
Okay, so you and your fancy degrees land in Silicon Valley, and where of course the sidewalks are paved in gold and it rains term sheets. and you experience this entrepreneurial journey, and eventually you decide to exit to Coveo. What are some of the things that surprised you along that journey?
That we made it long enough.
I don't know, so many things. Like it depends. Like you want to get personal?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So okay, I think like one of the things that was fascinating to me is the fact that it was angel investors and the way you connect with them, and you were one of them then. And it's the fact that people will want to be part of your journey. They kind of want to live the same thing you're living through you. Not everyone is like that. Like there's a bunch of investors that are just like investing because they want to invest, and so they run a process that is different. But especially like in funds kind of work like that as well. But for angel investors, there was this thing that is, yeah, it was almost kind of a transfer. And if they can empathize with you, that is much more important than any metric, at least like when you're very early stage. Because in the very beginning, people have to believe in you. Unless you really, struck gold or something, but otherwise it's basically you. And surprisingly, also funds kind of work like that. That was the most surprising thing, because like I can understand when people invest their own money, and this is a process, and there's tons of reasons why you want to do that. Even, I want to just invest in things I like. It's my money, I do whatever I want. But how emotional the investment decision was really, really strange. And not only strange, it was also something that you kind of have to remind yourself every time you go out and pitch, because it's still counterintuitive when you think about it. Like when you do that, then you kind of get the handle of it. But otherwise, it is counterintuitive. So there's the temptation of going like, I'm going to show numbers and I'm going to show that, all the stuff. And that matters less than showing momentum.
Beautifully said. It's captured perfectly. It's such an intense experience that to anyone who hasn't gone through it, you can't possibly describe. When you say, it's all about the money. No, it's not really all about the money. It can't be about the money. The sacrifices that we make, and again, being personal, the personal connection that we had as we went through this journey together. You can't. There aren't words for the commitment that you make.
It can't be all about money if you're a founder, for sure. But exactly, like I think like the most surprising thing for me was it's not all about money also for investors. I mean, a part of that is also because like they, like when things are so early, you don't know what you're doing. Like even when you're investing, you're kind of, there's a component of you throwing darts at the board that I think is just part of the game. And so all this non-quantifiable factors play such a big role in whatever decision process factors in everything, and you decide, okay, this is an area where I want to invest in, and I think these guys are the right guys.
So Jacopo, you spoke at a meetup that I hosted, I guess now it was a couple of years ago, and you gave this very eloquent analogy about the way data and AI models can be trained to learn like toddlers can be trained. I thought that was the best example of how the role that Tooso was playing in the world was so far beyond e-commerce search for high-end fashion brands. There's a route to market and there's a business, but that you guys had a vision and a passion for what you were doing that far exceeded the product that anyone would ever experience. Talk to us about that kind of vision you had, and about some of, what really drove you at a visceral level, some of the big ideas you had.
Sure. I mean, I think we can start from, when Ciro and I start working on things like well before Tooso was a legal entity in Delaware. And this idea that, there's only one physical system that we know of in the world that actually learn things. Okay. It's a pretty expensive one. Like it's very hard to debug, but it's our kids. That's the only things we know that go through the process of learning like hundreds of new words per day at a certain point in their development is kids. Okay. And so the question that we set out to ask is that maybe there's something that we can learn from, how humans process stuff to make machines more intelligent. According to the old, motto that if you don't know what to do about something, just, learn from the best, like copy what the best, what the best people are doing. And in this case, it's basically ourselves as small humans. So that's kind of what like the philosophical manifest of a lot of things that we did. And the joining between them and the market was small data. As in, kids are super good. I mean, then, of course, when somebody wants to learn a new stuff, you just point to this. Maybe you don't speak Italian. This is a bottiglia. Okay. And from now on, with one gesture, one example, you learn about this, right? Which is incredible. Okay. And the join with the market for us is that, well, if you're not Amazon or Walmart or whatever, you don't really have that much data chances to learn about your user or, how people search or something like that. So there was also kind of a direct path with this idea that learning with less data is sure philosophically and conceptually interesting, but also it's actually super valuable. So I think that's point number one. And then point number two is that, well, we come from, like a lot of studies in, cognitive sciences and psychologies. And so there's a lot of things that when building machine that goes beyond e-commerce. And I think at Coveo, we kind of had the chance, thanks to, the company, like thanks to now being part of a, bigger and more global organism, to actually double down on some of this idea and show that this idea actually work at a bigger scale than what we ourselves would hope for when we started Tooso with our, in the garage and so on and so forth. So I think there was a pretty good bet, and it's a bit of a contrarian bet. Like in a world where a lot of people kind of stress the importance of huge amount of data and, crunching this incredible model, a significant part of our, of our mind is devoted to do the opposite, as in, can we do more with less?
Yeah.
Can we do more with less? So
what's the path between the current state of the technology and, hypothetically speaking, a time when AI-based semantic search will perform, let's say, as accurately as humans?
Well, who knows? I think like natural language processing is in a strange place now.
Yeah,
it is, because so there are things that improved so massively in the past 5 years, and they definitely changed the game to a certain extent, and not necessarily, like, they also raise some potential problems, I think, but on the other hand, they seem not to actually change the game when it comes to understanding language as a kind of a more broader cognitive phenomenon, and this strange way that humans use to communicate. I think, like, if you think about right now, you have like deep learning is, a few years ago, deep learning was all right on natural language processing, right? But it wasn't like image recognition. It wasn't completely disruptive. Well, now we are in a place where, honestly, there's a chance that I'm going to see a world where I cannot trust a text, and I don't know if an excerpt of text is written by a human or a machine. And it seems very likely that I'm going to live through those years where I simply cannot trust anything digital. On the other hand, the very strange thing is a system like GPT-3, or, like a huge neural network, in this case, a transformer, doesn't really know anything about the world, which is fascinating. So the question there is, if something reaches human performance level, but the goal is to mimic the performance that a human has, or if what we're aiming at is a system that is somehow similar to what we perceive that cognitive task to be. I can't imagine a world where machines perform as humans, and we basically share very little about how we get to perform that task. Which I'm not sure it's good, actually. But
that's a better question, is, speaking philosophically, what should the aim of AI researchers be? Is it to replicate the human decision-making process, or maybe there's something else and it's explicitly not to replicate the decision-making process for humans?
Going back, to the founding, conference of artificial intelligence was defined, it was this idea of like building machines. I'm not quoting verbatim, but it's probably close. Building machine that will do tasks that, if performed by humans, we will define as intelligent. And I think there was a naive, as in what we understand right now, and I think GPT-3 is a super good example, is that what we really discovered in the last 10 years is not how to make machines more intelligent, but like how many things that we thought requires intelligence actually can be tricked. Like, you can actually beat the test, instead of learning stuff, you can actually beat the test, so we speak. So what we learned is that image first, 2012, imagine that. But now GPT-3 and all the NLP stuff, it kind of tells you that a lot of linguistic stuff that we thought required data understanding can be performed to a sufficient accuracy without understanding. I don't think that's teaching a lot about language or understanding, but engineering wise, that's teaching. I mean, that's an incredible achievement for humanity, right?
And that's where the field is right now. I think also, like, if you go to conferences and things like that, like there's an overwhelming effort in beating the thresholds of the different models. So it's about benchmarks much more than about asking questions that we don't really know how to answer. I feel like there's a lot of interesting work that is done in that area that is not necessarily like in the top AI conferences, but it's like it is an intersection of AI and cognitive sciences. Like, we follow the work of Tenenbaum at MIT very closely, of people like, Noah Goodman. So people that are actually, technically speaking, they're not in AI. They're like more in the computational cognitive science field. And a lot of that informs what we think artificial intelligence ultimately is. But it's very different how you could, like, it depends on how you conceive it. Like, is this something that has to work in a product and people can do stuff? Or is this something that should help us understand a little bit more about ourselves? Because the two things can be like super different. I think it's a worn out image, but it's usually very useful. Is we can fly, we just don't fly like birds though. Like, we build planes and they honestly work even better. Now the question is, like, is this analogy an analogy that can be maintained for something that is intelligence, for something that we identify as so quintessentially human? That's I think it's the most profound question. And I mean, there's also like a bunch of obviously like practical ramification that is like, oh, the system performs super well, but I don't really understand how the thinking process of the system works. Can I trust now the system to take decisions that I think are vital for something that is vital, again, in the human world? So can I trust this thing to, deny a loan to someone? How do I navigate through that? Because maybe maybe it works beautifully, but when it doesn't work, can I walk backward to and kind of understand what was the thinking process of that system?
So we talk casually about this holy grail of replicating human intelligence, but I'm not sure any of us have a shared understanding or a shared definition of what intelligence is.
It's even worse than
what is
that.
it?
We don't have a definition of meaning. We don't know what the meaning of words is, which I think is the main problem in natural language processing, frankly.
Yeah, I think the Turing test has done a disservice to our whole field, in that we end up chasing this rainbow and awarding people something that we can't even really define, what the endpoint is or should be.
I mean, chasing tests in general is probably not a very good thing. But if you go back to, it was a long time ago. And I think Turing was basically saying, since we cannot really define intelligence, let's just like part philosophical question. And he thought of what could be the hardest thing ever, like, fooling human in a dialogue. Again, it was fairly before GPT, right? So it was like a long time before. Yeah. And at that point, it was sort of like, it seemed like the guy was, was a pretty smart dude. So it was like a decent idea. But I remember that even back in the days, people were like, oh, we're like 1 decade away from solving this, right? Like, AI is the field that always is a decade away from solving stuff every decade. Like every decade you ask people, and it's like, no, it's 1 decade away. And then it is.
It is absolutely amazing when you think about it. That the first project to solve intelligence was a summer project. That was absolutely crazy, right? When you guys are like, yeah, I mean, we can figure this out by September, right? And that was,
it was also Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy.
Marvin Minsky, exactly.
It was also
1955, I think, at Dartmouth College.
Yeah. Good team. I mean, it was a good try. It was a good try. Like, good team.
I think, and also, in the original paper about the Turing test, I don't know, like, people fail to mention that in the same paper where the test was proposed, and as Jacopo was mentioning, kind of as a way to sort out a problem that otherwise becomes very philosophical, and probably, I don't know, people started feeling that was kind of deciding how many angels can dance on the pin of a needle. And so, but he actually also says that the question whether a machine can think can be solved with a test, and it's a meaningless question. So that's actually almost verbatim in the paper. So I think also Turing felt that the question was a bit like asking if a submarine can swim.
So taking it back down to Earth level, something that I think is not philosophical is the impact that bias training data can have on automated decision making. And this is very relevant for your area of expertise, document retrieval. What are some of the tools of the trade that you use to mitigate the impact of bias?
So in our product search life, so let's say the Tooso life, I think biases are a bit less concerning than in most cases for two reasons. First is that, there's anonymized data there's really no way of knowing even the general person in the very beginning. Second, the decision you do tends to be front-end decision about shopping behavior that is somewhat limited in a person's life. I don't want to diminish the importance of shoes, but worst case, you're not going to buy a pair of shoes, or you're going to buy a pair of shoes that's slightly different than the one you've bought because of our suggestion. I think all in all, we can all understand this is like a low risk, area. I think as a company, like bigger companies or companies with more areas of more touch points in they need to be a bit more aware of all these problems. And I think careful monitoring and responsibility for the data science are kind of super important. There's been a bunch of now MLOps, so to speak, tool that helps you diagnose biases and problem in shifting distribution and stuff like that. But I think it's a fair thing to say that in most this is an open there's no playbook that applies to everybody. I think it's an open problem, and depending on your vertical. And again, these weird things of a profile risk, these weird things data comes in, but also your profile, your risk profile is in how bad can my mistake can be. I think that's where you have to find your solution. It's something that resists standardization, as all humans, as all things that at some point touch humans tend to do. There are things that are very easy to standardize, like back propagation and neural network, all back propagation work the same, sort of. But this thing is a bit more human specific, I think.
Yeah, interfaces also play a big role in that, which is another problem that is, it's not only the fact that the models can be biased, but then the models are embedded in products, and the way in which the outcome of the model is exposed to the user can retroactively change the way in which it has an impact on how people interact with the product and produce new data that again will be used then to train new models. So there's also the additional complication that I am not even sure that this is a problem that can be figured out all by data scientists, but it's more of it seems like that kind of a holistic approach is required, just because ultimately these are going to be applications, and the way you design an application makes all the difference between something that can turn out to be terrible. I mean, damn, we have look at social media, right? That's who would have thought, right? In 2005 that all this the recommenders would have played such a big role, in such a complex role to debug. We don't know how much of that played a role in very big things like presidential elections, or international summits, or the shifting of political opinions in countries and things like that.
As I let this conversation go way over time because I've been enjoying it so much. In fact, I think this might be our longest episode ever. So,
okay.
Congrats, and thank you for letting us go way off script. I'm not sure we discussed a single one of the topics that we had prepared for in advance, which is perfectly fine. But I do have to get in one last question, and I'd like to hear from both of you on this one. Fast forward, let's say even just 10 years. What's one task that we routinely do as humans today that you think AI will be able to automate?
Yeah, because it's not.
It's fairly.
The single steps are easy, but then the whole thing, factoring everything, is not.
I would say something that I deeply hope that we automate, which is customer service. But I'm not sure it's gonna be in 10 years. I mean, most of my interaction with customer service are fairly trivial from a human perspective, but still very hard to gather from a machine. And I think there's incremental step from where we are to a complete solution that makes a tons of sense. Like whatever task, whatever the task can be break down in, scheduling is a good thing in smaller stuff, but then you have to have this overarching like planning. It's still hard for us to do because now machines are very good at this, at specific things, but are not good at
predicting a long arc.
Clapping all together and do this narrative arc somehow, this planning. But I think in 10 years, it's not a wild dream for us to have this small part of our life completely automated. Like, hey Siri, I want to go back home. Can you make travel plans?
Can you figure it out?
Yeah, that seems. Or like, hey Amazon, I got the wrong San Pellegrino.
Basically, what you're saying is that in 10 years we might have a chatbot that works. That is.
Yeah. I mean, surely we didn't get it in the last 10 years. No. So
that's true. And truthfully, we're all close enough to NLP that I think having NLP that quote works. Certainly, if you broaden it beyond a very narrow domain, I think that's very ambitious.
That's the key. That's a key. Yeah, that's a key. That narrow domain and small topic that small task that can become together. I think that's something that can be.
And that is also like a beautiful example of why designing your interface is going to make like all the difference. Because like if you think about it, the fact that human decided to do chatbots as opposed to like search bars, it kind of introduced a whole bunch of like. We were trying to get something that is human-like. I think the very idea was, can we get something that sounds intelligent in a more personal way? But at the same time, it introduces a whole bunch of problems because now what we have to model is not only information retrieval, we're actually trying to model a conversation, which is a super complicated problem. So on the one hand, it created an entire space. On the other, I still feel like, think about that. Like, think of what if Google was a chatbot? Nobody would use that, right? Like, nobody seems like you can't really do real work on a chatbot.
I didn't think anybody figured it out. I mean, but as human, we do because we chat to each other and we accomplish stuff. But for machine, there's still this thing that when you chat to a machine, they can accomplish a narrow thing. So if you're narrow, of course, that can work. But just scheduling a travel, which is, narrow, but not that narrow. There's like a lot of pieces moving on. I think it's still something that we need to figure out.
Yeah, I'm sure that when, the choice of the interface was somewhat innocent and possibly like in the, like the optimism in the AI field that made the field very famous for it. It's like, yeah, I'm sure we can get like a talking machine.
We figured out chess. We figured out chess very easily. Exactly. Why can we figure out hi and bye and how are you doing? Yeah.
Well, how about this, guys? In an upcoming podcast, maybe not next year or the year after that, but one of these days, the three of us will be talking about the company that we started to solve the travel search problem or the travel discovery problem using a chatbot. What do you say?
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
Good stuff, guys. This has been so much fun. And thanks to everyone for joining the Tooso family reunion.
Thank you very much.
Guys, look forward to having you back sometime. Great discussion.
Oh, yeah. When we get back.
For now, this is Dan Turchin, your host of AI and the Future of Work, signing off, but back this time next week with another fascinating guest.